Here's Vivian Blade. I'm sorry that she could not be with us in person today, but it's great to see her on screen. Oh, I didn't realize this transcript. Let me get rid of that. I'm sure you don't want to see that the whole time. There you go. Okay, so let me introduce Vivian. Vivian Blade is recognized as one of Engagely's top 100 HR influencers of 2021. She's a sought-after leadership expert and thought leader. She works with the world's top brands, equipping leaders with resilience that inspires teams in the face of ongoing disruption and thrive in spite of insurmountable odds. I think Vivian's importance in this world has greatly increased the past 2 years with COVID and all that we've gone through with COVID and keeping employees engaged. So her impact is felt as a frequent speaker for association conferences, and she delivers leadership development programs, executive coaching, and consulting for corporations. Vivian applies her extensive business, finance, and leadership experience from a 20-year corporate career with GE and Humana. And she is also working at the College of Business as an adjunct professor in the MBA program, as well as in executive education. Vivian's also a prolific writer. If she had been here today, hopefully she would have brought her books that you could have looked at, but we will talk about how you can get those books. If they're not here, she does have a website where you can order them. But she's been featured in a number of professional industry and business publications and has published books that have helped thousands of professionals succeed. Her #1 bestseller, which I think she's going to review today a little bit in her exercise, is Resilience Ready, The Leader's Guide to Thriving Through Unrelenting Crises, reveals the key to living and leading with resilience. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Vivian speak.
All right, thank you, Ramey, and good morning, everyone. I apologize for not being there with you in person today, but I spoke at the SHRM Conference, Society for Human Resource Management National Conference last week, and received the gift of COVID while I was there. So I have been isolating and feeling much better, and you know, all my time for isolation is just about up. But thank you for being part of this instructional tool showcase today. And I know the time that you have spent with Ryan so far, really learning a lot about ambition, has inspired you and inspired you to think about positive leadership in different ways than maybe you haven't before. And we're going to continue that conversation this morning as we talk more about the concept of resilience, which really builds on a lot of what Ryan has already talked about with you. And you'll see some of those synergies as we talk about this topic of resilience and primarily resilient adaptability, which is the skill set that is so important for us, especially during this time that we've been through. But I also want to help shift the focus from not only what we have been dealing with so far in this pandemic, but what we deal with each and every day. Much like Ryan did with you this morning, we're going to be interactive to some degree. I'm going to have you participate in an exercise so I can demonstrate one of the tools, and I'm going to make you aware of a number of the tools that are available to you through the Project on Positive Leadership Tools area of the website. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and then we'll have some time for questions a little bit later. Ramey, can you hear me okay? Everything going okay on your end?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm coming to the microphone. We can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. All right, great. And you can see my slides and everything okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, thank you. So, you know, as I mentioned, the importance of resilience in leadership, and when we think about positive leadership, I've got a couple of QR codes here for you. One on the right-hand corner, and you'll see these again, is the link will take you right to the link to the Project on Positive Leadership Tools page for resilience. where you can easily access all the things that I'm going to be talking about with you today. And then on the top left-hand corner is just a way to connect with me. And as Ramey mentioned, there's a link as you click on that QR code also to access Amazon and the Resilience Ready book and workbook if that is something that you are interested in checking out a little bit more. Right. So important for us as we think about really what defines us as leaders. What I think about a lot is more of the everyday challenges, disruptions, surprises that we go through. Things at work when I walked in the office today and this wasn't what I anticipated, or you get to the end of the day and boy, I feel like I didn't get anything done on my to-do list today. Everything is still there. Has anybody ever had that kind of day? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. We have. And how do we react and respond to those? Do we react and respond as positive leaders? Or given just the challenges that we face and the surprises, do we respond in ways sometimes that are not necessarily as positive? And when we look back and reflect, we think, I really didn't lead in a way that really supported my team and helped us to move forward through all of these things. But besides the big pandemics, really more and more of what we're dealing with is all that we have on our plates every day. And when we go through all of the change and transition that are ahead, the uncertainty that's ahead, then it really calls us to think about how we lead. So I want you to think about resilience and connect it to not just the big pandemics or when I'm really going through a crisis, but when I am leading and living through the day to day. In fact, the crises of stress that comes from how leaders lead and the change and the transition that people are going through each and every day as they come to work has created a level of stress unlike we've seen. And finally, we are getting more attention toward the mental health needs that this has created than we have before in the past, and more opportunities to really talk about all of that. There was a study by the Limeade Institute that showed that in their survey, more than 43% of respondents said that they were actually feeling burned out at work. And in fact, over 70% said that they had felt some level of stress during that week. And 43%, almost half of those people, actually burned out. So there's a human capital toll. There's also a financial toll on business, which means that we really need to pay attention to this. There are all sides of the equation and all sides of the coin that tells us that we really need to work toward being more resilient leaders. We've got a cost of over $300 billion when we look at things like employee turnover, when we look at absenteeism, when we look at effects on productivity. All of those areas are costing business. So we really need to pay attention here. The other impact that I know you felt is this turnover tsunami, which through the pandemic, we have seen it elevated. But if you go back before that, and even as we're looking ahead, as we think about why people leave their jobs, a lot of it is because of the culture, the work environment, and the person that they work for, the leader, the manager that they work for. And that is going to continue. In fact, statistics by the Society for Human Resource Management tell us that we can expect potentially a turnover rate of somewhere around 30% to be the norm. How can we deal with that? And better yet, going back to thinking about some of the things that Ryan talked about earlier around ambition and really asking different questions, how do we lead differently so that we change what the future could be? We change the possibilities of those turnover rates and make sure that we have organizations where we're engaging people, we're keeping people, we're leading more positively. So when we're in these daily situations and when we are responding with stress, just the situations themselves bring on a lot of stress. And when we are going through change, going through crisis, going through those surprises day to day, it evokes in us a level of fear. And from my research, and I'll be sharing with you some of the things that I learned in my research for the Resilience Ready book. And I found that individuals, teams, and organizations exhibit a lot of the same characteristics that I'm going to be talking about throughout today. And one of those is when we come into something that we weren't anticipating, we have three types of fears that tend to show up for us. One is a fear of uncertainty. Secondly is fear of loss. And third is fear of failure, fear of uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what the future is going to be. I am fearful of losing my job if we change, if we do things differently, if we try to be more efficient. If I go along with this, why can't how can I push back and protect what I know, what I'm comfortable with? And then there's a fear of failure. And when we think about failure, oftentimes we think about organizations and leaders who are risk averse because they are afraid of fear. And when you have opportunities through change, we miss those opportunities because we're trying to protect ourselves and we end up responding with an amygdala type of response or an emotional response, that emotional hijack that gets in the way of us seeing things ambitiously and responding in more of a protective mode. When we do that, I found that there are these 5 stages of what I have called internal crisis response that we respond when we are going through fear, when we have that fearful emotional hijack that can get us settled in not a constructive response, but a response to fear as a victim of the circumstance, as someone who is, just lost control. This is something that I did not ask for. This is something that I have no control over. And I'm just settling then as the second stage in because I have no way to overcome this. Once we sort of get used to how the new normal may be, then we can begin to survive. And a lot of people get stuck in surviving because I figured it out. I figured out how to make it work. Everything's okay. But I'm not really, I'm certainly not thriving, and I'm not necessarily satisfied with where I am and how things are. And so it really is not until we get enough of that in us or that feeling that something more is possible for us and we begin to take that courageous step forward and move into the courageous stage that we are able to open new doors of opportunity. Some of the fear subsides and we have a greater level, therefore, of resilience that helps us to thrive in new ways. So when we're responding as a victim, we have no real resilience. We see the world as the glass is empty, versus when we're thriving, we see the world as the glass is full, and it's overflowing with opportunity, and it's there for us to take advantage of. And that really is what we want to get to as individuals and as organizations. We as leaders have a tremendous opportunity to set the tone for our teams and for our organizations. And it is when we can realize where we are personally in these stages of internal crisis response, and how change, how a stressful situation has affected us, that self-awareness comes into play here, then that gives us the more opportunities to be able to move through these stages. A couple of things to keep in mind. One is that we are human, and we are going to experience all of these stages because of the fact that we are human. And then secondly, we are going to bounce around these stages. Just because we are thriving at a certain point in time and has moved to that point doesn't mean that we're going to stay there. It doesn't mean that when something else happens, I'm going to experience the victim stage once again and figure out how to survive through that. But it's when we can be aware of that and know how to move through that. Again, have some of that muscle memory that gives us a superpower, if you will, of resilience. I created an assessment. It really is a self-survey to help people recognize what their typical response may be through these stages, and where you might be at a given point in time, and to be able to reflect on, given a recent situation I've been in, how did I move through that? And what did I learn from all of that? One of your resources is more information about these stages of internal crisis response. So, what is resilience then? And when I'm thriving and working through those stages, how do I begin to find resilience? So we're going to begin to shift our conversation to talking about that. I really like the American Psychological Association definition of resilience, which is how we adapt well when we go through trauma, crises, transition, change, all of these things that we experience. And it really is that adapting piece. And when we put these two concepts together of resilient adaptability, is really what empowers us as leaders, as teams, as organizations. Oftentimes we think about resilience as bouncing back, and we don't necessarily come back to the same place. We think about that a rubber band concept, if you will. But what I want you to think about is that adaptability. If you want to use an analogy, think about the flexibility, the adaptability, the agility that a rubber band has, and its ability to have utility and purpose as well, which is so important when we think about our ability to adapt. One of the leaders that I interviewed for the Resilience Ready work was Tonya Jackson. She's a senior vice president, supply chain leader with Lexmark. And she talked about the fact that when we go through something, we know that it's not going to be perfect. Perfection is not the goal. It's going to be messy. So let's leave some space for that. And let's leave some opportunity, some space to take some risks so that we can find our way to courage and find our way to thriving. One of the other things that I learned was in looking at examples of leaders and teams and organizations, individuals who exhibited this level of resilience and resilient adaptability. There were 5 core principles that came up as common across those individuals. And I also found that there were some associated leadership practices that will help us and guide us in leading in a resilient way. And those 5 resilience ready principles are our perspective, our purpose, perseverance, partnership, and praise. I'm going to introduce you briefly to each of those. I'm going to share with you what some of the resources are, and we're going to dig into one of the resources. When we put the framework of these resilience ready principles together, and I was able to also discover that there's an aspirational picture of or vision of what we want our teams to become as we are resilient ready organizations. And to describe that, resilience ready teams, they really rally around a meaningful purpose with a positive, we can do this together perspective. They pull together in trusted, diverse, and inclusive partnership to persevere against all odds and praise generously, recognizing the individual and collective effort that has been given, as well as the progress that's been made. Resilience ready teams, they exhibit something different. They exhibit an ability to pull together as we have described it here. All right, let's dig into the resilience ready principles. The first is perspective. And I love this quote by Muhammad Ali because I think he really hits the nail on the head. What you're thinking is what you are becoming. Our mindset is powerful, and we know from research, and you don't even need research to tell you that the power of positive thinking really helps to inspire our future. So perspective really is all about how we see things, the mindset that we have. And we set the stage as leaders. Our mindset sets the stage. So our goal with perspective is to not to have a Pollyanna view as we really think about optimism and inspiring optimism as our opportunity as leaders. And so we don't are not called to have a Pollyanna view, but to have a factual view of what it is we're dealing with and make a mental shift to what the possibilities could be. Going back to what Ryan talked about, shift your questions, shift how you're thinking and the types of questions that you are asking. And whatever you're going through, there's a way forward. There's a different outcome that we can seek. One of the best examples for me on this was Jack Welch. I worked for GE in my career when Jack Welch was CEO. And always, there were several things that were important about his leadership. One was just his optimism in leading the business and always encouraging you to think about what you could do differently in order to find a solution, to find a way through. The other thing that was really important about his leadership was his integrity and his values, which, there was uh, no room for a lack of integrity and values under his leadership at GE. I won't say that everything was always perfect or that he was always perfect all the time, but certainly was part of what was important and what we were taught as leaders within the company. So one of the things I want to share with you is that one of the resources I made available is for us to be able to think about our resources our values as leaders. Values are foundational. And this resource of really thinking about our personal values helps us to discover what that is for ourselves and helps us to connect that to what's important to the organization, the values of the organization. And we know when there is an important match, when there's a good match, that we can really lead with purpose, as we're going to talk about in the next Resilience Ready principle. Also, our values grounds us. When we're going through something, we can always come back to our values as sort of our North Star and find that resilience within our values. So I understand that you have a copy of this resource, the Perspective Core Value Sort exercise. And what I'm going to invite you to do is look through this list of about 80 values here. And it's a 3-step process to narrow it down to your top 5. You may already know what they are, but go through and check about 20 to 25 of the values that are most important for you. Put a check mark beside those. So you can, you've got about a fourth of this list that you can check. Then, of the 20 to 25 that you check, circle 10 that are most important to you. I'm going to give you just a few minutes to look through these, and then we'll go on to the last step. So check off 20 to 25, circle the 10 that are most important to you after that, and then we'll go on to the next step. All right, once you've narrowed down your top 10, then put an asterisk beside the 5 values that are most important for you. Put an asterisk beside the 5. And I know it's hard to choose from this list because we have so many values that are important for us. And when you're ready, Ramey, I would love to hear just a few of the values. Maybe people can share one of their top 5.
Sure. Does anybody want to volunteer?
Fun.
Fun.
Authenticity.
Authenticity.
Creativity.
Creativity. Yeah, that's one of mine.
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Meaningful work. Okay. So Peter said wealth, but not like financial wealth, but like wealth of knowledge, a full range of
Awesome.
wealth. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Faith would be one of the most important ones for me, and family. I appreciate the cross section of values that you've mentioned. And one of the things to recognize is that we are all different. When I spoke at the talent conference, SHRM's talent conference, after my session, one of the participants, this was one of the resources that I shared, one of the participants said, I've already emailed this tool to my team. I've asked everybody to fill it out. And when I get back, we're going to discuss it. And that's one of the things that I encourage you to do. There are questions on page 2 of this tool that help you to think about what role your personal values play in your life, both personally and professionally. And then, it's important to bring your team together to have those conversations and to understand that so that you can value that in your team members. Great. All right. And then even as you are using this as a tool for instruction, it's a great tool to get people grounded and thinking about what their values are. All right. Excellent. The second Resilience Ready principle is purpose. And I love this quote by none other than my mother, who said, "You weren't born just to be born. You were born for a purpose." And, oftentimes when we are going through change or crises, we can see that purpose may shift sometimes because our team members, our customers may need us a little bit differently. But also, too, we may see that they need us even more than they may have before. Some of that becomes a little bit more apparent. So, our goal with purpose is to think about truly how am I being called to serve? As we're thinking about change, as we're thinking about leading people through change, as we are thinking about our roles as leaders, how are we being called to serve? And we think about the future. What are the outcomes? And what future state are we looking forward to? What's that vision of what we want the future to be? And how can we emerge even stronger? So, again, create something different for ourselves in our future. Why are we here? When I think about purpose, I've just been doing some work with the Kentucky Nurses Association, some strategic planning work. And you talk about the purpose for nurses, and you talk about the purpose of the Kentucky Nurses Association in fulfilling the needs as we went through the pandemic and even as we are moving forward. But their work is so vital, and it's visible to us in a lot of ways. Sometimes we can fulfill our purpose, though, and it's not necessarily that visible, but important for us to recognize, to think about, and to work toward. One of your resources that you can download from or request from the site is a really something that thinking about purpose, creating a vision beyond the adversity, really re-examining the why and thinking about what that future forward is going to look like and how you get there. The third resilience ready principle is perseverance. And a lot of times we think about perseverance as really much like this image that you see here. We got to keep going. We got to just forge straight ahead, headstrong through the wall, whatever it is that is facing us. And what I want us to think about when we think about perseverance is how we can persevere smarter, not harder. And so perseverance really is more about setting the stage so that we have the psychological, the emotional and physical strength to push through that adversity, regardless of what it is we have to face. So trust and transparency is important here. Wellness and well-being is important. And as leaders, we create a lot of the environment that sets the stage for a lot of that either burnout to occur, that 43% statistic we saw earlier, or a much better environment where employees are engaged, teams want to stay and work with us. So that's our goal. One of your tools for perseverance is a communication model that I created, the crisp communication model. And it goes through just giving you an overview of how to think about communicating in different ways and more engaging ways to help foster partnership and resilience. So you have access to that. We need to really think about that environment of trust and transparency. And communication is a big part of that. And I talk much more about that in the book. The fourth resilience ready principle is partnership. And this quote by Henry Ford really expresses that well, where we come together, that's just the beginning. If we can keep together, that's progress. But when we work together, that's really when we can experience success. And so partnership is being intentional as leaders and forming connections through experiences that you have with others, and building on the strength of those relationships that develop to work together in achieving a common goal. So we want to make sure that as leaders, we're leading with inclusion, we're leading with empathy here. We personally are reaching out for the resources that we need during times of challenge that we're going through. We're reaching out to our team members, and that we're with empathy, that we're listening, that we're doing a better job of listening. What are your resources in this same resource with perseverance that I just talked about with the communication model? Talks more about empathy and how we can practice empathy and active listening. So those are great exercises that you can work on individually, work on in instruction, work on with your teams as well. And I've demonstrated how you can do that in those resources. The fifth resilience ready principle is praise. And Brian Tracy reminds us that we need to develop an attitude of gratitude. Say thank you to everyone you meet for everything that they do for you. We forget about just that simple thank you so many times, but it's so important. Praise is about a few things. One is, giving ourselves some grace and some self-love, because we're not going to do everything perfectly. That goes back to what Tonya Jackson was saying earlier, and giving us some space. And then we also want to make sure that we are recognizing both the effort that people are putting in when we're going through change and doing things that we're asking people to do, and the progress that's made as well. So that pat on the back, that thank you, goes a long way. Finding ways to recognize individuals and knowing what's important for them individually for recognition and for your team. Being intentional about recognition is important. And one of your resources is a way to do that. It's a way to come together as a team and help people, everybody, think about, how do I appreciate the other members of my team? So this resource is an exercise that you can use to do just that. So when we use this framework of resilience ready principles of perspective, purpose, perseverance, partnership, and praise, then that empowers us as leaders, as we also look at these leadership practices and competencies and virtues that we can begin to do with excellence toward leading in a more positive, resilient manner. Then we can be more resilient when we face those challenges. We can respond to them in an adaptable way versus in a stressful way that creates more anxiety and chaos within our organizations and teams and within ourselves. Resilience is an individual and it is a team sport. So we need to make sure that we are working on our personal resilience, because people can see through that in us, because it comes out in how we lead if we are not working toward personal resilience. But it also created a number of additional resources. So within the book and workbook are a number of resources and exercises to be able to engage your teams and to take your resilience to your organization. There are also these discussion guides for each of the resilience ready principles that have a series of questions that allow you to sit down with your team, have discussions about what you're going through, and foster team resilience across each of these principles. I'll leave you with this final quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who encourages us. We're going to go through some things, and as we have just come off the heels of Juneteenth and thinking about the freedoms that so many people gave their lives and sacrificed so much for us, and are examples of when we think about resilience. But he inspires us to think that if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever it is you do, make sure you just keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. I've shared a number of resources with you today. Also, at the Resilience Ready Today website, there are also a number of other resources that are accessible. Coming soon is an Equipped to Thrive Leaders Mastermind community, something that I'm working on to help get leaders together to really think about and work on personal and team and organizational resilience. All right. And with that, make sure we connect. And I'm glad to take maybe a minute or two to answer any questions that people have, and then turn it back over to Ramey and Ryan to close.
Does anybody have questions for Vivian? I just wanted to say that many of the resources that she referred to are on our website, and then she also gave her website as well, so you can go there to find additional resources as well. So thank you. All right, Vivian, we're clapping for you.
Thank you. Thanks,
I just
everybody.
want to say thank you for adapting. We were resilient
Absolutely.
today. We got through this on Teams, and I really do hope you feel better soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks for being
Vivian.
here. Bye.